Welcome to the RobatDesk podcast. I'm Rob Blasi, and with me today is Brian Kreeger. He's an author, a speaker, a consultant on faith-based leadership and more we'll get into. And Brian, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, sure, Rob. I've been really looking forward to this. It's been a long time coming, but we finally hooked up and here we are. Been looking
Right?
forward to it.
No, and I don't know if you realize this. We have a few similarities, Brian.
Okay, shoot.
I was reading your bio and I realized we have both studied at Duke.
Well, that was a couple of week certification program, so I don't want to act like I was there for years and years and years. But yeah, I've been to Duke, and actually, I went back down. Probably a couple months later, as part of the program there, they take you to this particular treatment program for addiction.
Oh, wow.
And took somebody down there from around central Pennsylvania here, where I'm from.
Okay.
And, in order to duplicate the program. So that Duke program was terrific. And then in the Raleigh-Durham area, we went back down.
Very good. Now, yours is more extensive than mine. I just went for an afternoon to a coach's clinic about basketball with Coach K and about 1,000 of my closest friends to watch a Duke practice and learn from those guys. That was a number of years ago now. So, but no, we have that in common. We both spent some time at Duke studying different things and for different reasons. But
yeah,
nothing.
I never actually went in the gym. I wanted to go in the gym, but anyway,
it was the only time I was in Cameron Indoor, and they have these like those ropes they have at like TSA or wherever to sort of to guide you and make lines, and they had that like outside the trophy room, just like, hey, you shouldn't be in here.
Oh,
and I'm looking at it like there's all these
hallowed
trophies,
ground,
and you're just like, you're looking around, there's no one there. You're like, sneak right under there and started reading all the trophies, and it was fun. So went there with. It was the year. I don't know if you're a basketball fan much. It was the year Kyrie Irving was playing at Duke.
Oh, okay.
So it was that year with the Plumlees and all that. But I digress. So I could talk. It's March Madness too, so I could talk basketball for quite some time.
Oh, yeah, it's that time of year.
The wonderful smell is in the air.
I just I have a close friend. I always just call him and say, "What's the score?" and I don't even know what game's on, but I know he is watching a game and there is a score. So you lose him for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get that. I just got married a few years ago, and I'm still trying to help my wife understand the importance of these weekends.
Some things they just don't understand.
She doesn't, yeah, but I'm working at it. So, but one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is I was impressed. You started a free health clinic in your urban area a number of years ago. And what got you to do that?
Well, honestly, it was I don't know how else to say it. It was just a God thing. I had been doing a lot of different things at church. I had been biblical counseling. I had been running adult Sunday school. I was setting up events. I was doing tons of stuff. And I mean, honestly, I could just go on and on and on. And I fell into that trap of I was doing so much, but I wasn't necessarily focused.
Okay.
And I wanted to focus all my efforts on one thing. And tons of things happened, whether it was books I was reading or messages at church or life experiences I was having, all the boards that I was on. I've always been on a lot of nonprofit boards. All those things kind of came together at managing grocery stores for 26 years.
Oh, wow.
And two things did not make sense. And I had kind of decided that we were going to do something in the city. I wasn't sure exactly what it was going to be. I was actually thinking about a youth center, and I came across somebody who said, "Hey, did you ever think about a free clinic?" And I said, "No, I've not really thought about it, but this is all about fulfilling a need." So I went around and I had realized that God had to put these people in my life that knew all about running health clinics.
Okay.
So I did that. I went around town and hooked up with these people and realized, wow, I have quite a network that could do this. And most of it came from, running grocery stores. I mean,
really?
I got to be and being on boards and active in church and people I graduated with. It was all these connections that I felt like God had lined up all throughout my life. So we went at it.
What were some of the big hurdles in starting a health clinic? I just always think like there's a ton of liability in doing something like that. And
Well,
what are some of the hurdles you face in doing that?
well, I'll tell you, the biggest hurdle was everybody thought I was nuts. I mean,
Okay.
it had nothing to do with liability. There's a program out there that the government, federal government, throws out there. Um, I'm trying to remember actually what it is now. FTCA, I think it was called, and that covers all your liability. I mean,
Hmm.
you become part of this program. You hit the standards that they require, and they cover you on all that, like malpractice insurance and all
Okay.
those kind of things, which is very expensive in our state. It's extremely expensive, and
Did you get
yeah,
doctors and like physicians or to
oh
just
yeah.
volunteer their time, or how'd you get the team together?
Again, it went back to all those connections that were already lined up in my life that I didn't even realize.
Hmm.
So I just knew a bunch of these people, and the person that said, "Hey, did you ever think about a clinic?" happened to be a physician's assistant.
Okay.
So it was he, I, and one 20-hour clinical coordinator that started the clinic. I can tell you now, February was 9 years. Obviously, we're coming up on 10 years. And now it's up to 22 medical providers that are volunteering, 3,500 patients.
Oh wow.
I haven't been there in 4 years, but I keep in contact. Just getting ready to buy a new building. I mean, it has grown tremendously from really nothing. But the biggest hurdle was everybody thought I was nuts. I ran grocery stores for 20 some years. So what did a guy
What
like that have to do? Those two things have nothing to do with one another.
is that what usually people's objections were? They ask like, well, what experience do you have in the field? Or
Sometimes, but the people that were there initially knew me, knew my passion, knew that I could follow through and make it happen. I always called it a three-legged stool, and I'd always have to shore up those three legs. One of those legs would be the providers. So I would go to a doctor and I would say, hey, this is what we're doing. Now it was a Christian faith-based organization, so I would go to doctors that I knew walked strong in their faith and were looking for an outlet that they could practice medicine kind of like the old way they used to spend time with their patients, get into their lives, get to know them. Whereas today's environment doesn't necessarily allow for a lot of that in most
Mhm.
cases. So, but the doctors would ask me, well, how are you going to fund this place? And where? Where are you going to do it? So then I would go on to the next one. So I would try to find a place that we were going to start it.
Mhm.
Because then when I would go to the people that were going to lease me the space, what would they ask me?
Well, where are you gonna get the money?
Where are you going to get the money? And they would ask me, what providers do you have on board? So then I go to the funders and I say, hey, we need money. What would they say? Where are you going to put it and what providers?
Oh, so yeah, so it's like which domino is gonna fall first that's gonna
Yeah, so it became a three-legged stool. It was constantly working those three things. And, somehow God made it work out. And so I'd get a provider. Then I would talk to the funders. Hey, I got a provider. I got this. I got that. And, then I'd go over to the person leasing me the space and say, hey, look, I got this grant. Hey, and I've got this provider. I mean, it just continually, it was a round robin the whole way around.
Oh, I can
So
imagine.
anyway,
No,
it
very
was,
so that gave you a lot of then insight into I'm sure more of the leadership with an organization.
oh yeah. Then I had to put a board together,
Yeah.
a board of directors, which, to be 100% honest, I like to move fast. I like to be decisive. And sometimes a board of directors, while they bring you a lot of wisdom, they slow you down. So I didn't bring a board on board until probably, I don't know, a couple months before we opened. Because, I'm very aggressive and want to go get it done.
Yeah,
So,
no, I could see that. Like
so
usually in faith-based organizations, it's death by committee.
yeah, and to be honest, that's just not my personality. So anyway, it was. It was a great experience. I ran the clinic for a little over 4 years, and and then some things happened. I don't know how much you want to get into that, but um, some things that led me to write the book that hopefully we're going to get into here in a little bit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because then the next question I have for you is because you talk a lot about leadership and with your leadership background and more on a faith-based side, correct?
Oh yeah.
So what's the difference between for someone who would go like, well, what's a faith-based leadership versus a non-faith-based leadership?
Well, most nonprofits have extreme similarities. Um,
Mhm.
in a Christian nonprofit, you have a kind of a different goal. Our goal at the clinic was to share the love of Christ um, without necessarily sharing Christ. We wanted people to feel the love of Christ before we even presented anything like the gospel or anything a little more heavy.
Mhm.
Um, we wanted to serve people, and we wanted them to experience that. We wanted heavy relationship with people before we even went down that road. And I had some people not happy about that. They wanted me kind of pouncing on them. And I had had a life experience myself many years ago, 30 years ago, I would say,
Mhm.
that said that kind of turned me off and sent me in the other direction when somebody was a little too aggressive with me. But
Oh,
we, the doctors, we asked them to ask the patients if we could pray with them. If the patient said no, hey, that was the end of it.
mhm.
Um, we didn't push it, we didn't force it, because what we found was 2, 3 visits later, when they realized that we thought more of them than just a patient or just somebody to put a checklist or a check mark next to. Once they realized that we cared about them as an individual, then they opened up about all those types of things, and they were more open to what we had to offer. So, a Christian organization really just has a different goal. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, really, I didn't care what we opened. I hate to say it, that sounds kind of callous.
Mhm.
I just wanted to share the love of Christ with people by serving them in an area of need in our city, and
No,
and it became a free health clinic.
no, that makes sense. I was curious because a while back I heard, I don't know, a while back, a number of years, but it used to be when churches were planted, hospitals were planted as well.
Oh yeah.
And so when then you see all these church plants and every school or strip mall now has a church in it or a church plant being planted there, but you don't see like health clinics being planted by churches often. At least I don't. Maybe I'm just not in the world of seeing it. So it's one of those where you kind of go, has the church focused too much on church plants instead of, you know, taking care of the community plants?
Well, if you and I would think I, I'm going to assume you probably know this, but most huge hospitals and universities in America, they were
Oh
uh,
yeah.
church supported, and now they're just almost all of them are just big businesses.
Yep.
And but they all started as a faith based mission, and again, that's colleges and universities as well. And unfortunately, they had to make choices, and most of them are no longer have Christ as part of the mission.
Oh yeah. No, it's a sad part of that. But it's just interesting when you think of how people try to reach people, and not that church planting is wrong, but it's like it seems like they're missing, like almost like the three legs of the stool. There's something missing. Like if there's much effort and resources plugged into planning, health clinics or resource clinics for people, whatever that would look like to help the community out, would that do better than just another church plant?
Yeah, I obviously I planted a faith based ministry, and I believe exactly what you're saying. I believe you're right on target, in my opinion. People need to know you love them individually before you can kind of get into the deep stuff. And
Well, it's kind of like leadership in general, at least into, I would say, more
oh
into
yeah.
culture where, like,
Hmm.
I coach basketball, where it's like you have a title which allows you to give them a direction where they have to listen,
Hmm.
but but you're not really leading them until, like you said, till they know they care, till
Yeah, exactly.
and so it's like they'll listen at first because, like, well, you have the title coach or you have the title CEO or the manager title, but until they realize, oh, Brian is actually looking out for my best interests.
Oh yeah, there's such a difference between a manager and a leader. I can tell you early in my grocery store managing career, I did it all by policy, strict policy, and there wasn't a lot of caring in it. Now, did I advance? Did I give the company what they wanted? Yeah, I did.
Mhm.
But I look back on it now and I'm thinking, Brian, that it was just not leadership. That was just pounding people in the ground and based on policy. And it took me a number of years into my career to realize, leadership is not what you're doing, and you need to make some changes.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting world with the corporate culture. Like, you see all these leadership books out, or
Hmm.
I call it pronoun leadership, where it's like there's no real. It's like we need to care about people. If you show you care, or my favorite one I've heard is where they talk about, maybe change it, like how, people get quarterly bonuses or annual bonuses, and if you change that up, people will care more because they're not just a number, or could get, restructured at the end of the year because they, their salary is like, but they never really give any practical real solutions. It's like, do you just give everybody a higher salary and don't give people incentive bonuses, or do you
Oh
change,
yeah,
how do you metrics their incentives then?
yeah. If you look at the, I know I opened a free clinic, so I know a lot of medical people,
Yeah.
and coming through COVID and all that, the nurses were just, I mean, there was a nurse shortage. Now you probably know there's even a bigger nurse shortage. And I think that's a perfect example. They're continuing to raise the rates that they're willing to pay, the pay rates, but that doesn't mean the nurses are necessarily responding to that.
Oh yeah.
So it's not just about money and a check mark and a body doing a job that you need done. It goes well beyond that. I can tell you, people that just love their boss, they would bend over backwards. They don't necessarily need the raises. They just need to be treated right and to be cared for, be respected.
Wasn't it some of those studies out there? I'm just generally talking about studies without them in front of me, but where people leave bosses more than they leave
Oh
the
yeah.
salary.
Oh yeah.
And then a salary only keeps someone happy for like 30 to 60 days at the job. Like, if you get a raise, you're happy for the next 30 or 60 days, but you're back to where you were.
Yeah. It's not about the money. To me, it's as I get older,
Hmm.
I'm 56 this year. I'm more worried about time.
Yeah.
It's not about money anymore. And I want to be somewhere that gives me personal fulfillment, doing things that personally fulfill me, like writing the book or talking to you or and your audience. That's personal fulfillment, and it's just not about the money anymore.
Yeah. So what got you to write the book? What was the turning point where you're like, I can help people out with what I'm learning here?
Well, it's a bit of a long story. Um, so I'm at the clinic, and I'm running the clinic, and it's doing very well. I think it went from in those 4 years, the budget almost doubled 4 times. I mean,
Oh, wow.
it really cranked. It was something like that. Don't That's not my strong, but it was going very well, and I started to struggle. Struggling in a lot of ways. My identity started to shift. My priorities started to shift, and I get into all this stuff in the book. And I got addicted to adrenaline. For a nonprofit leader, you get addicted to that look in somebody's eyes, a donor or a community person or whatever, when you announce new things, new programs, new piece of equipment, new this, new that, and you become addicted to that. So all of a sudden you're announcing stuff constantly, but your focus really gets messed up.
Hmm.
And that was happening to me. I stopped listening to people. I mean, I didn't know how to open up a free clinic, so I was listening to everybody, and I went and found people that did it, and the people around me were supporting me. My family was supporting me spiritually. Initially I was at a place that I had never been before, I was totally relying on God. So many miracles were happening. It was crazy. But all of a sudden, I started to, as you know, and people don't necessarily try to do this, but it happens. They put their leaders on a pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
That pedestal is very difficult. The pressures, because all of a sudden you're not a human being as an individual. Your identity is all wrapped up in what you're doing, and that can happen in the secular world or this, faith-based world. But you become so wrapped up in it, and all of a sudden, God wasn't this this being that I was counting on, that I was dependent on for everything in the clinic. After I got rolling, all of a sudden I stuck God in the corner and just said, "Hey, I'll call you when I need you."
Mm-hmm.
And, it just, my life was just falling apart, and I experienced extreme loneliness and isolation because I couldn't tell people what I was dealing with, that the pressures were getting to me, and my own personal struggles, because all of a sudden my identity, people saw me as the clinic, as the organization, as an individual. So if something bad was happening in my life, or I was becoming unsure or insecure or, like I said, isolated and lonely, that would reflect directly on the organization. And that's very difficult to deal with. And you know what happened was, I ended up, after about 4 years of doing that and about maybe a year of struggling,
Mm-hmm.
Rob, unfortunately, I went out and I had a 3 month emotional affair.
Mm.
Um, Emails, meetups, and it never went beyond that. It never got physical or anything like that. But either way, it was not appropriate.
Yeah.
And it was just simply living a sinful life that was full of delusion. Um, so one day of course, and eventually I got busted, and it was all revealed what was going on.
Huh. That's interesting because you don't hear people use that, like the emotional connection more than the physical connection, and a reason of things going too far. I get what you're saying. It makes 100% sense, but you don't hear that a lot from people, at least admitting it.
Yeah, and yeah, it goes on more than what you realize, and some people just don't acknowledge it, or they get out of it quick enough, or but it's actually, you look it up, it's actually more dangerous than the physical, because it just hits such a deep point, and that's where I was at. It was deep within me.
Hmm.
And so, I had to tell my board. So I go to my board, and I took complete responsibility. I had nobody to blame but myself. And I really, was in, a bad spot. So I go to my board,
Hmm.
and we had an emergency meeting. Of course, I told the executives, and I had kind of a silent co-founder. I went to him, told him what was going on. And so anyway, we had an emergency meeting of the board, and we're all sitting together, kind of set the scene. It's two 6 foot tables that barely fit into my office. We're all sitting around this table up against the walls, and I tell them what's going on. And, of course, their jaws are dropping, because nobody would have ever expected this of me. Because I was flying high. I mean, I was in the
Hmm.
newspaper multiple times. I mean, the Sunday paper did this feature for years, People That Matter, and I was featured 2 years in a row in our Sunday paper. I was on the cover of our Chamber of Commerce magazine. I mean, everything about it was just flying high.
Nice.
So their jaws dropped. And one of my board members, there's 11 of us in the room. One of my board members looks at me and says, "Brian, what role did our organization play in what you described here today?" And I didn't know how to answer that question. I never even thought about it. I just took responsibility. I just never even thought about it.
Hmm.
But as I was, over the next 2 years, it took me 2 years to really, I would say, be fully released from this other thing that was going on. It just would not leave me. And that's a whole nother story. But that question continued in my head. And actually, in our area, among Christian nonprofit leaders, I was getting us all together. We were having lunches. I mean, before this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had good relationships with a lot, and I knew a lot of them were struggling with
Mm-hmm.
these same identity issues and pressure issues, and not having friends that you felt like you could share it all with. I mean, gosh, this podcast, if I went into all of it, it'd be 3, 4 hours.
Yeah, and I gotta
But
imagine.
but um,
So
so that question hung with me and hung with me and hung with me, and eventually I realized that a lot of nonprofit Christian leaders, nonprofit leaders in general, are dealing with these same issues. So it led me to write The Courageous Ask, a proactive approach to prevent the fall of Christian nonprofit leaders.
So, what would you tell someone who's either getting into that role of leadership, whether it's coaching, like for me, it was coaching a basketball team, or working at a nonprofit and taking a leadership role? What safeguards, or what would you tell them to sort of encourage them on the front end to be aware of the downfalls?
Well, it's funny how you started this podcast near the beginning with what are the differences between a secular and a faith-based nonprofit?
Yeah.
Well, this is one of the biggest differences, because you go at it at a completely different angle. Um, so, one of the things that I say for people that are just getting into something, write
Mhm.
down who you are. Take some time, invest in yourself, and invest in your organization enough to, hey, write down who you are at that time, because at some point you're going to be looking in the mirror and you're going to be asking yourself, who the heck are you? Because there are things that are inherent in leadership that can become stumbling blocks, and there are things that got you there that um, that formed your character and your personality that put you in a position of leadership.
Mhm.
The key is to not lose those things. And as I described how I kind of started to fall, and I realized it towards the end of my time at the clinic, um, it was all those things that changed. So trying to keep yourself on course, the course that got you where you are, with family, with your spiritual habits, and your the level of spiritual leanings that you have allowed into your life to get you to where you are. And like I said, the clinic was completely a God thing,
Mhm.
because I had studied, and I'd watched miracles happen. I had this whole mindset that I wanted to please God in it. But towards the end, it was all about pleasing me. It was all about building myself up. But too many.
Do you think that leads to then, like, even you, or did it lead you out? Like, I've seen some pastors, especially, where it's like it's a toxic leadership then at that point, because the ends justifies the means on getting something done, where you may burn people, but you're getting bigger things done.
Oh yeah, that started. I don't wouldn't say it was necessarily toxic, but when I go down the line of I wasn't listening to people,
Yeah.
I had all the answers. I've been there. I've done that. It just got very extremely arrogant. And kind of back to my point, I wanted to finish that previous point
Yeah.
was, so many times for a leader, faith based or not, um, your family and those things that got you there to develop who you are, that you could take on such a leadership role or be a founder of an organization. Those things are family and spiritual, and too many times those things become um, a blur in the peripheral vision as you're pointing yourself towards a particular goal,
Hmm.
and they are not the focus anymore. They become, again, in that peripheral vision. And for the person that's getting in to a leadership role, those are the most important things. Those are the things that keep you grounded. Those are the things that form your foundation. But if your goal in the organization becomes your main focus, that's where you run into trouble.
Well, then how would you help someone clarify, say, growing in a role and staying focused on the role, where it's like it's easy to say I'm growing into being a bigger, better leader, but then also keeping like the guardrails up or keeping grounded at the same time.
Well, one of the things that I talk about in the book is that I interviewed dozens of people for the book, by the
Okay.
way, because
Yeah.
I didn't just want my perspective. My perspective was only one perspective.
Hmm.
So I wanted many perspectives. And you know what you find with pastors or Christian nonprofit leaders, really any leader, is it becomes difficult to be yourself. All of a sudden, I know my wife would hate to go to restaurants because she knew that because I had to raise money and I was representing this organization, I could never turn it off. So um, she would always have to sit with her back towards the door because I had to see. Now this is a diluted state, okay? I had to see who was coming in the door. I had to be able to see the whole restaurant. I had to see, is there somebody I need to go shake their hand? Is there somebody that could be a potential funder or influencer for our organization? So you lose that sense of who you truly are. And honestly, I, a high percentage of pastors, I mean, a high percentage, 58%, I think it is, say that they don't have any real true friends. And that translates easily to Christian nonprofit leaders. I mean, it's like 60 some 70%. I could look it up if I wanted, but it's a high number of pastors and Christian nonprofit leaders say they have nobody to go to if they were having a crisis in their own life.
Huh.
So, some of the responsibility, one of the reasons I wrote the book was we all have a role.
Hmm.
Okay, the leader certainly has their role in keeping themselves grounded, but so do all the people around them. I'm not saying they're on even the same plane, but the people around them. I had a pastor one time tell me, I'll have congregants come up and they'll be talking about this Fourth of July picnic they're having this weekend, and all the people that are coming and their plans, but they never invite me. And I heard that a number of times. I had uh, pastors sitting in front of me crying as I was interviewing them because this is a common problem.
Oh yeah.
So
I, I
this
saw
pastor
something.
said, when I go, if I were to show up their Fourth of July picnic, they can't have the same conversations they were going to have, and it just that's what they said. And I don't think they were being arrogant or anything, but it is the truth.
Well, my wife works in HR, and she sort of said some of the same stories in that when they have group outings. It's better
Uh,
for her just to leave after after dinner instead of hang out when they all go to the bar. And then
yeah,
it's funny you talk about with the pastors like not getting invited. I remember there was a big church I was going to back in Ohio, and the senior pastor stands in the lobby after the service, and no one was really talking to him. So I just came up to him. I knew him from past experiences and just talking
mhm,
to him. I was like, oh, I figured I'd say hi. I didn't want to take up a lot of your time. He goes, oh, most people don't come up. They always think I'm busy.
yeah,
It's like, and people just always have this perception that the leader or whatever, like you said, is like either they're unapproachable, they don't want to be approached, or they're afraid of they'll embarrass them. It's like they're just a human being too, just wanting to have a conversation.
yeah. Well, what I found in all my interviews, and I interviewed some other people that actually fell in their position, but that okay, everybody says, oh, our leader's only human, whether it's a pastor or a executive or whatever.
Yeah.
They're only human. But you know what, Rob, is that idea is really an abstract idea until the leader proves it.
Right.
When they prove that they're just human, in other words, they make a mistake of some sort, all of a sudden the it's like turning on the lights, the mice and cockroaches, they scatter. You know, it's it's an abstract idea,
Yeah.
in
Peop-
most people's minds, because they are looking for somebody to look up to. They're looking for somebody to inspire them. And a lot of times that's why people, volunteer at a particular organization or go to a particular church, is because they feel inspired there.
mhm.
And a leader is afraid to let people know that they're human because they want them to stay encouraged and they want to feel like they're worthy of their followers or their congregation or whatever. So they can't let their guard down at all. I mean, how many? It's hard to get to know a pastor too because they're afraid.
Oh yeah.
So
No.
I go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it makes a ton of sense there where they don't want to, they let part of their guard down. It's like then you see what's the saying? Like you can see the sausage, no one will eat a sausage if they see how it's actually made.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
When you get to look behind the scenes, and how many people do you know that got, church hurt from something where the pastor, whether they made a mistake and they've admitted the mistake or whatever, it's like people they'll hold every pastor they meet to that, and
Right.
once that hurt happens, to that standard of hurt that they were, a part of.
And honestly, these falls are happening all around us. It's not just these big time national leaders.
Mhm.
In fact, I mean, those things, they are still happening. There's no question. But I think the real damage is done in the small local falls that are happening, because people know them. They're much closer to them.
Mhm.
Whereas, the big national leaders, sure, we hear about it, we're hurt by them. But you know what? We're not seeing them in the grocery store.
Yep.
We're not going to Bible study with them, once a week. Those are the ones that drive much deeper. And that's why I say, let's get out in front of it. Let's be proactive. Because how many times does a leader fall? I mean, you've had to know one or two leaders that have fallen at some point, that we look back and we go, you know what? We saw it coming. Most times people saw it coming.
Oh yeah.
They either didn't know what to do, or they didn't have the courage to do anything about it. And this is really what my book is about, is empowering people to do that, to take courage, go do it, and to befriend their pastors. And for the pastors or Christian leaders, set up those guardrails, around them, and, be vulnerable. Don't be afraid to be human.
Oh, absolutely. If someone wanted to pick up your book, where's the best way they can get it?
They can get it a couple of ways. Anywhere you buy online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, .com, anywhere like that. I have a website, briankreeger.com, and I write a weekly blog. You can sign up for that. I send you an article that I wrote, the 5 indicators that there's a potential fall coming. And listen to your podcast.
I appreciate that. Well, Brian, I appreciate the time you spend here. Is there anything we missed? I'm sure that we could go on for hours about this, but anything we missed that you want to make sure we touch on?
We all have a role, and one of the biggest needs that we have, is everybody wants to be known to their fullest extent. The deep down good, the bad, the ugly, but they also want to be loved and still respected and appreciated. So offer that to people, and especially your leaders, because they truly need it.
No, absolutely. Brian, we'll leave it with that. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you so much, Rob.